because the abstract of the social nuances of vocal tone and physical posture, those are too easy to misread, and they're all coming at you at one time. It's really important for a person on the spectrum to really get the information through the one stream of input that's most reliable to them, whether it's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or tactile, because that is the most reliable way to get the information you need, the way you need it, in the most reliable format.
So you think that parents should try to help their child figure out what that most reliable pathway is and encourage their child to ask for help in that manner when they need it?
Absolutely.
How does the child know when they need help?
Well, that's the bigger question. There are so many steps to that. One of the bigger obstacles there is that knowing that help exists. Because when you have a child that is very disconnected from other people, the simple act of trying to make the connection to ask for help can be seen as so problematic it's not even considered as an option. I mean, I talk to adults on the spectrum now that just say, I have to do it myself or I'm a failure. And I ask them, well, why is that? Why do you have to do it yourself? And they say, well, because it's too hard to ask other people. Or when they do ask for help, it's discouraged or it's criticized. They say, well, that's common sense. You should know that. Or, well, just use your head or figure it out yourself and then come back to me. So when they do make an effort to ask for help, it's sabotaged. I mean, when you look at the school system, it sends mixed messages in terms of help. Like, all three of my kids have IEPs. And when I hear how the teachers operationalize it, they give you the support, they give you all the help to build these skills in the idea that you will eventually not need help. So if you understand the contradiction in that, we're going to give you help so that you won't need it. And then when they do ask for help, it's, well, did you try and figure it out yourself first before you asked me? So in one breath, they're saying they want you to self-advocate and ask for help, but every time you do, they don't say, oh, thank you for asking, let me help you. They give you some kind of message that makes you wonder, why did I even bother? So you give your kids these messages all the time, and then that's coupled with the Spectrumite's very difficult time of organizing in a way to ask for help. And here's another nugget before I forget. My 7-year-old has some speech difficulties. And in addition to fine motor, the whole sandwich issue, imagine what it takes to organize your thinking and then turn that into the necessary mouth muscle movement to ask for help.
Wow. Brian, before the break, you were talking about the situation where schools will teach individuals to ask for help and then kind of squash their asking for help. What is the balance between when individuals with Asperger's should appropriately ask for help and when they should be doing things more so in a manner that helps them have the skills to live independently eventually?
Well, let's first clarify the idea of independent living. In my experience, in speaking from my own life and what I hope for my own children, it's crucial to foster more interdependent living because there are still challenges that I have that I routinely need to go to people to help me negotiate those areas of my life where I have challenges, especially in the areas of finance, making decisions on big purchases. Some decisions are some relationship challenges I have. It's very important for me to be cognizant of those areas where I really need another brain or two in the problem-solving process. So it's more a matter of realizing these are my challenges, what resources do I have at my disposal, and how do I access them? Because when people talk about independent living, they tend to mean live like I do. And it's more important to teach a person how to ask for help than how to learn to do without it. Because I think if that idea was a lot more flexible, we could probably have a lot more people on the spectrum living in a more interdependent way as opposed to feeling like failures because they can't do everything the same way the neurotypicals who are encouraging them to live are doing.
Okay, point well taken. And you have a concept about people doing things with other people.
Right. And when you consider, with happens all the time. we do something with each other. We do things with our environment. I mean, right now I'm breathing the air in the room. And when you are, in the swimming pool, you're doing something with the water. I mean, there's always interaction going on. And it's important to understand that when we go through life, there is this constant interaction, whether it's with the other person or whether it's with an aspect of your environment or whether it's with yourself. How in tune are you with where's this anxiety coming from? Where is this fear coming from? So we're talking about self-awareness. How well are you interacting with yourself? One of the best examples of interacting with yourself is your own feedback. When something doesn't go the way you want it, is your feedback to yourself, well, that was stupid, or what were you thinking? So working with yourself in that manner can mean the difference between whether you feel competent or incompetent. And that has just tremendous implications. And what you were asking before, the question about the school environment and the mixed messages and living interdependently, the idea of interdependence is fostering skills about how to perceive the relationship you're having in that moment. Because interdependent, the way it tends to be taught to people with special challenges, is to learn to do without others. Now, here's a crucial thing to understand. When you're dealing with people on the spectrum, the biggest challenge they have is doing with other people. So why on earth would you want to encourage them to do without others?
Okay, point well taken. You also have something called the Life Team Strategy. Does that have anything to do with what you just talked about?
It does in a way. The Life Team Strategy is something that I've refined over the years. It is basically a 5-point way that I have figured out to understand the complexities of the world. And what I have refined it to now is there's 5 different ways of having a conversation with the environment. And the 5 ways are the starter, the sneezer, the sitter, the shover, and the shouter. And the starters are the go-to people, the ones that have the resources. But that's in the person sense. In the object sense, a starter would be, there's a bright light, I need my sunglasses. So that object solves that problem for me. A sneezer is somebody who gives me encouragement, gives me support, but doesn't necessarily have any resources to give me. They just have their encouragement. A sitter is something that's neutral, really doesn't have any value for me. It's there. I can relate to it, but it doesn't solve a problem. A shover is something that's in direct opposition. Let's say that I really want to focus in a school environment, but the fluorescent lights are on, somebody's squeaking in their chair. So those 2 things are in direct opposition of my desire to focus. And then the shouters are the negativities. They're the opposite of the sneezers. Sneezers offer encouragement. Shouters offer criticism. So I look at everything in my world through the lens of those 5 things. So when I want to ask for help, per se, I want a starter. I want someone who's going to give me that help. So if I approach somebody else and ask for help, and they say, oh, I really don't know how to help you, but keep asking, I think you'll find it. That person's a sneezer. It's not that they're denying me help. It's that they don't have what I need, but they're encouraging me. A shover would be, I'm not going to tell you. Figure it out for yourself. They have the answer, but they refuse to give it to me. And a shouter would say something like, what are you, stupid? You should already know that. So by looking at things through those 5 lenses, I'm able to make it less personal for myself. And I say, okay, the interaction here is not the one I want. I want a starter interaction. I want the information I want. So it makes it a lot easier to not take it as a personal attack or a criticism because I've made it about the interaction I'm having. So I say, I want help on this. Can you help me? And then I encounter a shover. Well, I'm not going to tell you. Okay, sorry, this is not the interaction I was looking for. I was looking for a starter one. So I keep asking until I find the person who's going to give me the kind of interaction I'm looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think maybe all too often in family situations you end up with shouters, people who are giving negative feedback to the individual.
Yeah. And a lot of criticism like that, unfortunately, is not designed to solve the problem. It's all about assigning responsibility for the problem. And that's what a lot of criticism is. It's, no, it's your fault. And if you weren't acting like this, and if you didn't think that way, we wouldn't have this problem. when it makes more sense to say, okay, the problem exists, what is the problem, and how do we solve it? And much more of a starter interaction is going to be about that. Is, okay, I need some help. All right, what's the problem? What do you need my help with? How do we go about solving it? And everything that I've done in order to allow myself to be more effective is, how do I focus on the solution? And that's not an easy task to do by any means. I mean, I've been working on this for the past 20-plus years to find, what are the best mental strategies, what is the best mindset, what's the best attitude to have to allow myself to endure a world that is constantly criticizing me.
Very good. Let's move to the school situation. I know that bullying can be a big problem.
Well, that's a big issue in itself. And bullying in general, I mean, there are books written on why bullies bully. The bottom line is the bullies are kids with their own issues. They have their own pain. They have their own home situations. They have their own self-concept issues. And oftentimes a bully bullies because they see another kid that reminds them of how vulnerable they are, and they punish that kid. And sometimes bullying can occur just out of fear. They see a kid that acts so differently from themselves, and they're very confused by it. And what the other kid is doing upsets them so much that they want to bully the other kid to get them to stop what they're doing that's uncomfortable. So when you hear comments like, why do you act like that? Why don't you be normal? What the bully's saying is, why don't you be like me? Because I don't get what it is you're doing right now. If you acted more like me, I'd feel comfortable because you'd be acting within my comfort zone. So a lot of bullying is just plain old-fashioned ignorance. They don't know how to connect with a person that acts so differently from themselves, so they act negatively towards them because of their own discomfort. Now, of course, the solution comes in many forms. First, the schools need to recognize that it exists. Secondly, they need to recognize they have responsibility for dealing with the bullying. And thirdly, when it comes to special needs kids, especially kids on the spectrum, they say, oh, work it out yourself, or it's part of growing up. Spectrum kids have difficulty managing even the most simple interactions. So how on earth are they going to negotiate the complexities of a bullying situation? There absolutely needs to be adult involvement in remedying those situations.
It seems like that would be a good alternative for students with Asperger's to be in learning situations where their strengths could help them grow and learn and interact with others.
Well, I think it's more important that when you are in any kind of social environment that everybody's on the same page in terms of what are we here to accomplish. And one of the things that is problematic with the school system is they have very much tunnel vision in terms of what their objectives are. And they think that the only relationship they need to encourage in a child is the one between them and the textbook. And all these other relationships that go on, they don't want to take responsibility for. Well, the bottom line is a school is a community. And if you don't teach community values within that building, the kids are left to kind of fend for themselves and learn these very dysfunctional ways of interacting with each other. And it can be very competitive and gossipy and backstabbing and cliquey. And when you think about what you're trying to teach, this is what ends up happening without adult modeling. And it's important that there be a community mindset in the school system, and there really isn't one.
Brian, have you been involved in any IEPs, and do schools seem to hit the nail on the head when they design objectives?
Well, I'm involved in my son's IEPs, and I'm also often tapped on my clients to come sit on the IEP meetings for their children as well. And in terms of whether they nail it or not, again, it comes down to how did they define the problem. If they define the problem as the child is motivated or the child has an attitude problem, and that's why they're not meeting the objectives or whatever, that's part of the problem initially, is defining what is the problem to be solved. And it's not as simply as saying, okay, well, you have a reading challenge, you have a challenge with math. One of the things that I see routinely is this idea of the need to show your work in math class. Some of my clients can solve problems without having to take those extra steps, but they don't know how they did it. So you're actually asking them to slow their mind down, which to them seems like a waste of time because why would you want to do something more slowly? And also there is the organizational piece that requires you to painstakingly think in a linear way to put everything down on paper, and the amount of mental effort that takes can be exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine you need to do that for homework after a very long day at school when you don't have the mental effort to do so. Or let's say that during a test you have a very lengthy question to answer and you're very tired and have difficulty doing that. So it's not simply a resistance to doing the work, which a lot of schools seem to think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So some of it is just basic lack of understanding of how the spectrum mind works.
Mm-hmm.
There are some school professionals, though, who are very open-minded and they want to get other information. They'll talk to the parents, they'll talk to an occupational therapist, they'll talk to myself and say, what information do you have that can help us understand the child's needs better? So in terms of their ability to get it, I think depends on their own willingness to realize the limitations of their own understanding. As I'm sure there are a lot of your listeners that will relate to the staff who have already made decisions before you even show up.
Mm-hmm.
They have everything written down the IEP and say we've met as a group and these are the decisions we've made and case closed. So, I mean, the potential is definitely there in terms of getting it right on target, but it can really only be done effectively if more people who are committed to meeting the needs of the child are allowed to contribute to that process.
Right, and with all the budgetary cuts and et cetera, it's hard to imagine that more resources will be devoted for people to have more training, more understanding, more patience.
Yeah, and sometimes that's it. It's not a matter of them not wanting the information. It's a matter of access to it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I like to emphasize with schools is it's not always a matter of allocating resources for concrete services. Sometimes it's just a matter of changing your mindset. You know, certain trainings that teachers could attend that are just about understanding the spectrum mind better, that does not take necessarily a speaking board or extra OT hours or something. It's just about understanding from the people that interact with this child on a given day. And simply changing the way you engage a child can make a world of difference in their experience of school.
Yeah, very good point. Let's talk for a few minutes, in the few minutes remaining, about some adult issues like marriage or employees and employers and what you should disclose in a job interview.
Mm-hmm. Well, the biggest challenge I'm seeing is not only the emerging adult spectrum population, but just when you look at the basic needs of everyday life that seem to be beyond this population, first and foremost, it's finding employment. Either being employed in the area for which you have academic training, whether it's being employed with the number of hours you need, or whether it's being employed at all. So before even moving into the relationship realm, there are the issues of just surviving day to day. And one of the biggest obstacles I see out there is the interview process. And from a couple of the people that I've talked to who do interviews, when they tell me what they're looking for, they're looking for someone that doesn't simply meet a job description. They're looking for someone who they see successfully fitting the culture of that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you have somebody coming in who has social challenges, you can get a sense of that in the interview and say, okay, this is a person who won't fit the culture here. Maybe they fit the job description very perfectly, but they just won't fit us. And that tends to be a great barrier. So I think what needs to happen in a small degree there is perhaps we can begin hiring people that are suited to completing certain tasks and not alienate them simply because they're not going to engage in water cooler discussion. So there needs to be some open-mindedness on the side of the employers as well. But again, there's also responsibility for the person on the spectrum to be able to go in there and know what their social challenges are and be prepared to address those in a way where they won't come in and be a source of discomfort for everybody around them. Because I've met people on the spectrum who think, well, I can be quirky and I can be uninformed and unself-aware and people should just deal with me. I'm never going to buy into that. No, because you have to have certain obligations to the context. They're paying you to be there. They're paying you to provide a service. So you can't simply show up and be expected that I can just be however I want to be, gosh darn the effect it has on people around me. So, again, it has to come back to a sense of collaboration. The employer having a certain degree of flexibility in terms of letting somebody come in who maybe doesn't fit the environment perfectly but has a great deal to contribute. But on the other hand, the person on the spectrum is saying, I know I don't fit perfectly, but I'll do the best I can with the skills I have.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of collaboration, what's marriage?
What's marriage like?
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm currently divorced, but I'm also engaged to a wonderful lady. And marriage, and I do counsel some couples as well, and the marriage breakdown seems to begin with a vastly different definition of what relationships are. The adults on the spectrum that really don't seem to get the whole reciprocal back and forth nature of it seem to think of a spouse as someone who's there to solve problems at their convenience. They don't necessarily see it as an ongoing communication, checking in, making sure that other person's needs are met. And that's where it tends to break down, when there's not that collaborative aspect to relationships. Now, some people might say, well, how did they get into a relationship to begin with? Well, what I tend to see is the male on the spectrum and the female neurotypical who thinks that they can change the male. Oh, once they're married, they'll come along, or they just need some growing to do. You know, they don't see the challenges that the person has now as, we need to work on this now. We don't need to hope it'll just come along in the future. So they end up getting married, being incredibly patient, and hope the person will come along, and then one day they realize nothing's changed. So it can be very enabling. So from the standpoint of the person on the spectrum who wants to be involved in a relationship, it has to do with what I said earlier on is clarification. Making sure you are certain of what the other person wants from you. And you being proactive enough to ask for it instead of just sitting back idly by and waiting for them to let you in on it. Because people that are neurotypical rely heavily on nonverbal will say things like, I've given hints, I've made suggestions, can't you see it on my face? Doesn't you know what I want? Well, basically, no. We don't pick up hints or subtle cues. You need to come right out and tell us what you want. And the person on the spectrum, it's essential for them to realize they need information that way, that they're not going to pick up those cues, they're not going to pick up the hints. They need to go to their partner and say, how am I doing? You know, how am I doing as a companion? Am I meeting your needs? Am I being a good support for you? If not, what else can I do? And I've, of course, had to learn those lessons the hard way.
Very good, Brian. So I guess some take-home messages would be clarification, communication, and collaboration.
Absolutely.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for sharing your personally enlightened insights with us here today.
My pleasure.